Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that cultivates and stimulates your desire to be a lifelong learner. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, November 21st, somebody's birthday. And welcome to episode number 95, 5 Reasons Why College Costs Are Skyrocketing. In this week's news, welcome to college. Now take a year off. And we're in chapter 95 of 171 answers. And we're talking through the 5 main reasons why college costs are skyrocketing. And it's time again for some bonus content. And Mark is explaining how colleges recruit your students through student search. And Mark continues his interview with Mr. Steven Antonoff and Myths About College Admissions, Part 2.
Okay, friends, that would be me. I'm the birthday boy Anika was talking about. It is all good. Just speaking about Anika, you know, I started working with this new student in New York State, and her name is spelled Anika, just like you, but she goes by Anika.
And that's what I get all the time, by the way.
Well, she gets Anika all the time, and I can't stop calling her Anika. Yeah, but guess what? The family says, well, her nickname is Nikki, so now I just call her Nikki. So I'm bailed out.
I'm sorry, Anika, but I get you all the time.
It's very nice. It's all good. So I am back from 3 amazing days in D.C. at the College Board Conference. And instead of having our traditional college spotlight, I'll be doing a College Board Conference spotlight later in the day. And I had fantastic conversations with 8 highly respected admission directors and 1 highly respected financial aid director, all of whom have committed to be interviews on our podcast, Anika. So we have 9 people coming up. Now that's over 2020 and 21. Do you know the whole interview schedule is completely booked through 2020 into 2021?
Which is completely amazing. Thanks to you. Wow.
I have to leave some spots open, though, for like some major thing that happens, you know, get a guest. But that's all good. I think people are going to really like these guests. They're great communicators, and they're also schools everybody's familiar with. So we are ready to announce our date for our video webinar. This is special bonus content we do give for those who are financial partners of the podcast. Anika, you want to share the date?
Yes, we're going to do Sunday, January 12th.
7:30 p.m. So we'll go 7:30 to 8:45, and we'll be sharing trends happening in college admissions, take questions and answers. It'll be fun. We'll send the link out to everybody. We'll get a chance to visually see everybody. And so as for anyone who's given a gift of any amount to our show since we started, it'll be great to meet everybody face to face. And don't forget, by the way, send in your photos. Now, that's not for our financial partners. Anybody, send in your photos. Anika wants a photo gallery of all of our listeners. Just send a picture of yourself, your family, to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. And for our admissions tip for the week. So, Anika, 3 different schools have said this to me this year. They've said, you know, when we have our own application and we compare the number of students that we yield compared to the Common App, we do much better with our own application.
I'm sure.
And therefore, they track that. And so my tip is, if it's one of your top schools and they offer their own application, I know it's convenient to do the Common App, it's probably worth you putting it in time to do their school's application, particularly for private schools. So that's the admissions tip. Any questions on that, Anika?
No, but that's interesting because our counselor, it was one school. I said, well, let Janae just do it individually. She's like, oh, it's on the Common App. And I was like, no, I talked to Mark Stucker. And I didn't tell her that, but.
Yeah, please don't get me in trouble with this school counselor like that.
But I said, no, I think we're going to go ahead and go with their own individual app. And she was cool with it, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had lunch with someone this week at the College Board Conference who brought this up in a long conversation. And I was like, do you look at this for demonstrated interest? He said, yes. But here's the interesting thing. This is one of these things that's on the down low because Common App could not be clearer. If you have a difference in your admission preference and you're a Common App school for your own app, Common App will boot you out, and they have done it before.
Oh, really?
So it's not something that you can expect like an admission officer to kind of whisper and say, let me give you a tip, like use our app. because they can get in big trouble, big trouble, big trouble.
Mm.
Admissions vernacular, another term that somebody used this weekend when I was at College Board. I was talking, before I was going to give it away. The term is wealth aware. Any idea what wealth aware is, Anika?
I'm aware of your wealth.
What a cop out. You know they have all kind of information about you. You know they are aware of your wealth.
Right? I mean, that's all I got. What is it?
So I was actually talking to a school that is, we've said before, there's need blind, then there's need aware, right? Which is the same as need sensitive or need conscious. And so I was talking to a need aware school, and I was asking, how does being need aware impact your admissions decisions? He was like, we're not need aware, but we're wealth aware. And basically what it means is, like, sometimes families say to me, like, if I check the box saying I'm going to need financial aid, is it going to hurt me in the admission process? Because I don't have to check it, but I will if it's not going to hurt me. And so wealth aware basically means that schools are looking not just if you're full pay, but if you're high pay and full pay. And they're making that differentiation. These are schools that are tuition driven and need revenue to stay afloat. And so they're looking at the ability to pay and factoring it into admission decisions.
Wait,
inside baseball term, wealth aware.
Whoa. So are you saying that if I have wealth, I'm more likely to get admitted? I know that's kind of direct, but
to schools that are need conscious or need sensitive or need aware or wealth aware.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. We've brought that up before, Nick. You must have tuned those conversations out.
Well, I'm not wealthy, so it didn't stick with me.
Well, I never used the term wealth aware before. We used the term need aware. So it's kind of the opposite side. It just hits you in the face when they say wealth aware, right? But I mean, it makes sense because schools, look, we've talked about schools being in danger of closing. And so if a school is on shaky financial terms or even possibly on shaky financial terms, then they're trying to get on solid financial terms. And if they're tuition driven, which a lot of private schools are tuition driven, then they're looking at the ability to pay and saying, oh, this is a factor here. You can pay, maybe not all, but you can pay like $50,000. That's helpful to us.
Yeah, I guess we haven't.
I know you don't like the lack of equity and the injustice of it, but it's like kind of the reality, right? It is what it is.
Yeah.
I know, Miss Egalitarian over there.
I just want to be wealthy. How about that?
Miss Aspirational then. All right, let's transition. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark, this week's article is entitled, Welcome to College, Now Take a Year Off. And this is written by Miss Melissa Korn. I know we've seen her name before. And this is written in
Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal. And so colleges are offering financial aid to encourage admitted students to stay away for a year so they can travel, volunteer, or pursue other passions before starting their college enrollment. And yes, it's called the gap year. So schools are recognizing that students who take a gap year come back charged with this tremendous personal development, maturity, with this perspective from real world experiences that benefit, the school's community, both in and outside the classroom. So this article, just goes on and is basically talking about the traction of the gap year and how it's picking up and how it's gaining a lot of ground. So much that there's a wealthy couple at Duke University whose son took a gap year and they pledged $500,000 a year for 3 years to grow the school's gap year initiative. And they're only going to follow up with another $10 million to endow the gap year program. Wow. And so, Mark, what was most interesting was where the article talked about Colorado College, which has been able to track that the gap year participants graduate slightly faster and they have higher GPA. So they have data around that. Okay, Mark. So should I be preparing there for a gap year or what? What's going on?
It's not for everybody, but this is the evolution of the gap year. And of course, it's only for certain schools that have this kind of money. I will tell an interesting story. Shout out to Chris Perry, one of my favorite admissions people. He's at Duke. And I spent some time with him at the last SACAT conference. He was so excited about this program and what it was going to do. So there's a lot of jubilation within the admission office about this program. Colleges do love gap years, but the thing about gap years, one of the criticisms that gap years have had in the past is that, a little bit of a boondoggle for the wealthy, right? Like, who can take the time, because people tended to do some things, not always, because we talked about this before. Some people work, right? Some people shadow and do internships. Some people pursue certain projects. I've shared before, the students I worked with wanted to take a year and complete his filmmaking project, which he did. And then he deferred admission and then went to Northwestern after that. But it's sort of been seen as something that, those who are opulent, affluent, they have the resources to do some kind of more exotic type things, right? And this is sort of the evolution of the gap year kind of going mainstream, if you want to put it that way. Going from something that just certain people could afford to do now to something that is, applicable to the masses. Now, of course, this is not something that every school is doing, right? You have to have the resources for this.
Right.
But things are kind of going in this direction. And here's a quote from the article. As you mentioned, Colorado College now has 60 students taking gap years, which is 10% of their incoming class, double what they saw a decade ago. We've talked about here on the past that ever since Obama's kid, what was it? Not Malika. Was it Malika? Is that her name?
Malia, Mark.
Malia, sorry. I knew I was saying it wrong. It just didn't come out right. I know you're all up on Obamas. That's like sacred ground for you. Anything you hear,
I know that girl's name is not Malika.
I knew I said it. I knew it sounded wrong when I came up. I'm sorry, Michelle and Brock.
Tasha and Malia.
I know it. I just had a brain lapse. But they, ever since she took hers, it's really, really increased in popularity. I've had many schools tell me that they're getting many, many more requests for gap years. But a quote from this article specifically says this about gap years. It, talking about gap years, had a reputation of something that is elite, homogenous, and kind of a luxury. But that is no longer a fair description, says Abby Fallick, founder and CEO of Global Citizen Year. That group has 150 fellows living and working in India, Brazil, Ecuador, Senegal this year. So this is just sort of the next phase of the gap year, Anika, where they're moving toward actually providing funding because colleges are realizing that it's such a momentous experience. Now, having said that, I think there's some, we said this before, but 50% of your incoming class can't take a gap year. That doesn't work for your planning, right? I was just looking at Yale University, 5% of their students take gap years in the incoming class. So just looking at their college profile, most schools, pretty much all schools list their class profile, their incoming profile, where they say how many states they came from and the average test scores and all these different things. It's just a description of your incoming class. And I find that around that 5% number is about what I see a lot. So Colorado colleges, having 10% is a lot. And so I think it would be another thing for colleges to adjust for it to be like 15 or 20. I don't know if they're prepared for that from a planning standpoint, but I think it's a positive trend. I mean, literally, I'm not making this up, Anika. Before this call, I was having a conversation with a new student I'm working with. It's the second time I've worked with this family. And the first student took a gap year. And what was the conversation about? We want this child to take the gap year as well. And both of their parents are college professors. Do you remember me sharing them saying 30 years of teaching, they've noticed a difference with kids that have taken gap years? I shared that once before.
I vaguely
if you remember
that. Vaguely.
Yeah, well, that's this family. They're back with the second kid. And they want her to take a gap year as well. So what are your thoughts?
Well, let's go back to that family that's committing only $10 million to this initiative. So, I mean, I guess that child came back cleaning his room and doing all kinds of stuff. I mean,
venture capitalism. He was a venture capitalist. They make some money.
Yeah, but also the fact that statistic of, Colorado College saying that these kids are doing well, like they're doing better. So, I mean, after I read that, I don't necessarily want, I'm not going to promote Janae to take a gap year, but it certainly piques my interest. Maybe for little John, who knows? I don't know. So what if it does get to that where more families want to take a gap year? And so they do get to that point of, okay, 50% of our class is darn trying to take a gap year. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Do you think it's ever going to get to that point? Or
probably not to 50, but I think that the interest in gap years is growing at a pace that I don't know if institutions are prepared for that. In other words, most of the time institutions like to honor gap years, right? The majority of the time when people request them, they're approved. Of course, you need to give a reason, but people are usually smart enough to say that I'm not just going to get caught up on Young and the Restless or,
Right.
expand my Instagram watching from 1 hour to 4 hours a day. Like, they're smart enough to not say something like that, right?
Mhm.
They're going to say something, I want to travel, or I want to do service, or I've been working on this writing. I want to write my book of poetry, or, you know what I mean? Or I'm trying to figure out what I want to major in, and I want to do shadow days and, different things like that, or that are noble. And colleges like gap years because you have an extra year of maturity and you come in more focused and more self-aware. I think that's the key word. You come in more self-aware of what you want to do, what you want to pursue. You're older, you're more mature. So why would they not want someone who's more mature, more focused, more probably clearly in tune with where their gifts, interests, and passions lie? And so it is true that colleges do love gap years. Like, they do love them, but I don't know if they're prepared to handle, because there's all kinds of administrative things that happen on a school side, budgeting, planning, number of people in the dorms, from budget to certain programs and professors and majors and teaching. And so now, one thing I will say, Anika, is there's also gap semesters. We haven't talked that much. We tend to talk about gap years. There's also gap semesters, right? That's very common as well. It doesn't have to be the full year. It can be the semester.
Okay.
One of the things that I think colleges do like about gap years, although I don't usually hear them say this in the articles, but they certainly like, is that it is extremely hard a lot of times for a college to get their class right. It is hard to not over-enroll. You use all of your statistical metrics as much as you possibly can based on past years of results of what percentage of kids are likely to admit you. Public schools, schools have all kinds of pretty elaborate, data models on that. Looking at kids from this demographic, they pick us this amount of time, and kids that live within 30 minutes pick us this amount of time, and out of state versus in state, and kids in this test score band and this GPA level, like how often we get that kid when we put an offer out. They use all of those metrics to try to go out with the right number of offers. But let's just look at this last year. UVA over-enrolled. Virginia Tech over-enrolled. It was either 700 or 1,000. I should know that number. I think it was 1,000.
It was a lot, yeah.
Well, we did a whole article on, what was that school? UC. It was one of our first ones. It was one of the UCs that over-enrolled, massively over-enrolled. And remember how they were retracting their offers?
Right.
And they were, but this year, Virginia Tech, I really believe it was 1,000. They over-enrolled, so it creates so it's very, very difficult. And one of the things that gap years or gap semesters can do is they can give you some protection if that happens.
So let's drill down on that a little bit. So you're talking about schools like gap years. Are we talking about schools that have resources to fund gap years? Are you talking about schools that over-enroll? Or are we talking about schools in general where you might have a school that absolutely does not have the resources of anything, or I guess extra stuff like that?
That's a really good question.
And a child comes in and say, hey, you admitted me, but guess what? I want to take a gap year. How's that going to be received by that school that doesn't typically dive into the research and has the resources and all that stuff?
Yeah, so this is a good question you're asking. In general, the schools that are going to love the gap years are going to be schools that there's no question that they, not only are they fully enrolled, but they could go to their wait list and not drop off any quality at all and fill those. Like, if it's a school that's not fully enrolled and they're still admitting students in August, which a lot of schools are, by the way, they're still admitting students in August just because they're trying to meet their enrollment and budgetary goals. That's very different. Like, the schools that love the gap years, they're schools that are pretty financially stable. They're going to be at full enrollment. And if they take 5, 7%, 10% of their class that they approve a gap year for, they can just as easy go to their wait list and get it, an equally strong kid. And so there's no issue. So that's a good point. So it's for the schools that love it are schools that are in a really solid financial place and an enrollment place.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
It is, but what about the schools that aren't? So is it worth that child saying, hey, I think I need to take a gap year after you admitted me? Is it just worth a shot, or do you think it's just likely to?
Yeah, because if it's in your best interest, you should ask. And, it's not that common with those schools, to be honest. So it's still a good chance it could be approved, but, you just don't know. I think that you need to just think about whether it's in your best interest and let the college figure out whether it works for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If it's going to be a good thing for you, then, one of my former colleagues at KIPP, used to always say this, and it stuck with me. Shout out to, I said that and then I forget her name. Shout out to Jude Dawn. In South Carolina. She moved back there.
Oh.
But she used to always say, Mark, closed mouths don't get fed.
That's right.
You know, closed mouths don't get fed. So speak up.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, Anika, we are in the 95th chapter of a book I wrote, 171 Answers, and we take a few snippets every week from each chapter and talk about it. And the article today is 5 Reasons Why College Costs Keep Rising. You've read the article. What were your takeaways?
Well, you politely listed out all 5 reasons. So do you want to go one at a time? And
why don't we do that? Because they're pretty short.
We haven't done that in a while. We list all the time. I
Yeah.
can't list in a while.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So number 1 is investment in facilities. That often translates to higher fees for families. So that is one reason. We talk about what do you call it? The facilities arms race in these schools?
Yeah, this is one of these things that happens in colleges is somebody comes up with an idea and implements it. And then everybody else feels like, we need to do the same thing because the competitor around the corner is doing it, right? So there have been a lot of facilities races, a lot of different things. So there was the new dorms, right? So we talk about that. Like, Anika, when you went to college, did you live off campus all 4 years or were you ever on campus?
I did on campus a little bitty stint and then I was off campus most years. Yeah.
Okay, because I was on campus all 4 years. And so I'm sure you had what we call traditional dorms, like the long corridor community bathrooms. Am I right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's the only thing that was around. That's the only. We didn't even know any different. Now, try showing an 18-year-old a community bathroom in a traditional dorm, and they go ballistic on you. That's because the facilities race kicked in, and it came to the new dorms. First it was this, suite style, right? Mm-hmm. 2 on one side, 2 on another, then 1 on one side, 1 on the other, almost like mini singles. Now you got apartment style living. So then that swept the land and there's a lot of money involved in that. And then of course you have the student centers, everybody competing with each other, trying to outdo each other, keep up with the Joneses. I build a new one, then mine's 20 million, then yours is 40 million and all of that. Then we have the wellness centers. And then we have the athletic complexes. And so that's what we call the facilities arms race. And, you see other arms races that are popping up. One of the new arms races is starting, and I actually like this one, and we're actually going to be talking about this coming up in the next few weeks, is the career center, is the next sort of race that's going on right now where people are competing, which I actually think is actually a good one.
I want to see that one. Good gracious.
Yeah, that one's starting to pop right now. But so the facilities arms race, and we talk in the book, for example, University of Colorado spending $143 million on athletic upgrades. We've talked about, remember we did LSU before in the Lazy River. We talked about this stuff before. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was our first episode. Okay, Nika, this is a quote I love, and I just want to read it from Think Tank Learning. And it says, the college campus arms race is a sort of higher ed version of keeping up with the Joneses, where colleges find themselves forced to spend more and more on shiny new facilities and amenities just to stay in step with their competitors. So that's number 1. You want to transition to number 2?
Mm-hmm. Let's do number 2. So number 2 is the addition of administrative positions. And before you go bashing this, I want you to know that I'm one of these positions.
Well, I can't say anything negative now.
I'm very necessary. My job is very important, by the way.
You must have been reading this thing. Hey, they're talking about me. For those of you who don't know, Anika works at higher ed in the alumni office doing all kind of stuff, fundraising and all that stuff, planning, event planning, all that.
Yeah, necessary, by the way. But I did not realize that was a part of costs. I mean, it makes sense, but dang.
Yes. So I'm like tiptoeing on this one here, tiptoe through the tulips. So some administrative positions are great, right? I'm not saying they're all bad, but they do add to cost. And Benjamin Ginsburg makes the case the blame lies on excessive expansion of administrative jobs. According to Bloomberg, colleges have added administrative positions at 10 times the rate they have added tenured faculty jobs from 93 to 09. And so some people say that's a big expense, but it's also an upgrade in quality. We're not saying this is not upgrading quality, right?
That's
So sometimes to get quality, you got to spend money.
all right.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Let's move on to number 3, because I say anything else, I might get in trouble.
Well, but darn, it goes into it again. Like the third one is I think I read this right. You talk about the healthcare benefits for faculty and staff. Those play into costs. Wow, that's interesting. Again, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, 75% of an expense at college occurs are faculty and administrator salaries and benefits. And then healthcare, just the unprecedented rise of healthcare. So that would be number 3. And what's 4?
Number 4 is increased access. Oh, Lord. Yeah, to student loans, of course. You know, all the student loans we piling up. So there's your cost for you, the one we don't like.
Well, see, the interesting thing about increased access to student loans is this one's a little different than the others. So the others are more, because most of the time you're not taking a student loan from the college, right? I mean, there are colleges that do college loans.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So there are colleges that have their own student loan programs, but there are not that many that do it. And when they do it, it's not a huge expense and they're not doing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what this one has to do with is, and this is a lot of times a criticism that you'll hear from people, is that colleges can keep increasing their costs because programs like the Parent Plus loan that are out there and even private lenders will lend an unlimited amount of money to college kids. Of course, with, there is some credit checks in place, especially private lenders. You do have to qualify. Parent Plus loan, you can't have adverse credit history, but that's not that high of a bar to reach. And so here's a quote from, I'm going to butcher this name, but I'm going to try. Luca Noduld and Shen studied student loans for a decade. They found loans grew from $53 billion to $120 billion over an 11-year time frame. And then Think Tank Learning says it seems clear that giving schools access to a bottomless cookie jar, now this is a key, of federal student, so it's federal money, right? Of federal student lending enables the cycle of rising tuition costs and rising debt. So this is basically saying colleges, they call it a bottomless cookie jar, but you know what I mean? Like they can keep raising their costs knowing that people can tap loans to pay for it.
That's not good, I don't think. All right. But then, okay, so the 5th one to round it all up says decreased support from federal and state governments.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this next week in some depth.
Okay, so not related to loans, just federal and state government, like that, any special budgetary by your state, whatever, that they would have at one time made a priority that they don't make a priority anymore.
Yeah, and you know what? This is our featured article next week, so I'm not going to dive into this much this week, because we'll be all in it next week. But basically what this is saying is that the money has to come from somewhere. And so if you're having drastic cutbacks from the federal and the state government, then colleges are going to increase. They're not getting the money that they weren't getting, right, to run their operations. So therefore, they're going to have tuition increases to get the money from tap the people for the cash.
Gotcha.
And of course, it talks about Governor of Missouri, how he slashed $68 $1 million from colleges and universities in Missouri, and that he said he's going to slash more next year. And there's a lot involved in this too. I mean, there's some states that are, very, very, very conservative when it comes to, and governors when it comes to spending money on education. But if you're not getting the money from the state, then tap the people. And we'll be talking about that in depth next week. So I don't want to say too much more about that because people will be sick and tired of our content if we seem like, didn't you guys just talk about this week and now you're talking about it next week?
Okay, then we're done.
But what do you think, Anika, what do you think about those, about those reasons? I mean, because college costs have been going up like pretty exponentially, right?
Yeah. I don't know if the takeaway is for us to just value those things or to just know that they're never going away and we just got to suck it up. And I don't know. What is the big takeaway for this?
Well, there are a lot of takeaways, and some of them are save. Yeah. Take advantage of the things that we're talking about in this podcast about cost-saving techniques, tactics, methods. There's a lot of cost-saving techniques and tactics and methods when you know them for college. Right. And I'm not just talking about merit scholarships, like other things as well. Stuff like we talked, was it last week, Anika, where we talked about reciprocity agreements between states?
Maybe the week before, but recently.
Well, a couple of weeks, some recently, right? I mean, stuff like that, like just different things and other things that we're going to be sharing over the next year and a half, because we're talking money for a long time in this chapter, the second part of our podcast. And but it's a reality. So learning the tactics to make it more affordable, saving, knowing how to tap into scholarships, and knowing how to look for colleges within your means. But be aware that this is a trend that's been happening and it's going to continue to happen. I mean, here's an interesting stat. The consumer price index in the U.S. went up 26.7% from 03 to 13. College tuition went up 79%, literally triple. Okay. And we always talk about healthcare, right? How inefficient it is and how expensive it is and astronomical and exorbitant the increases in prices are. Well, healthcare went up 43.1%. So college costs are going up almost double the rate of healthcare. I think that puts it in perspective.
I believe it does.
All right. That was depressing. But, it shouldn't be, because we do have a lot of ways around it. A lot of techniques and tactics and strategies. And, there are a lot of things that people can do offensively besides just dig deep in your pocketbook and suck it up.
All right. It is bonus content time. And Mark, okay, so you're talking about how colleges recruit through student search. And, I asked you, I was like, Mark, what is student search? And so there's this, I guess this is, what do you call it? A search engine within the College Board that they, some service that they provide to outside people. They can buy listed names, but I'm going to let you dive into all that.
Yeah. So, Anika, this is something I've really wanted to talk about. We've talked about it before, but, we have to come back to topics over and over again because you can't remember all this stuff. So in episode 25, the name of that episode was Why Am I Getting So Much Mail from Colleges? And we talked about it, but we never did the deeper kind of dive that I wanted to do today. And so here's my question for you. I'm going to answer your question. Don't get me wrong. I'm not blowing you off, but I want to start with a question for you. I want you to put your director of admission cap on. Ooh. Think like an admission director for the next 60 seconds, okay? I'm not asking you to do it for 5 minutes. That would be torture. Yes. But 60 seconds, I know. For the next 60 seconds, you're a director of admission and you want to recruit students. Okay? How do you get students to know about your school?
I send them a bunch of mail. Pretty mail.
See? So you're trying to tee up and transition into what we're talking about today.
Well, but let me tell you this. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. I got this magazine at work and it talked about, it was a whole 3-page article around how to craft beautiful emails for recruitment methods. So yeah.
Student Search Service is the actual name of it. This is a College Board service. It's called Student Search Service. Nobody calls it that. It's so long. They either call it Student Search or they just call it Search. Well, that's like, you go meet someone on the street and say, hey, what do you know about search? They'll look at you like you're crazy, but that's like inside baseball talk. So I'm going to call it either Student Search or Search. The reason why this is so popular is because if you think of every other answer, well, let me challenge you again. Okay. What if I say you can't send mail or email to people? Now, what are you going to do to recruit? What's your next method?
Well, if I have staff, I'm sending people out to what I
Okay.
are some of the schools that, I'm going to send them to all the schools because I know there's talent that lies everywhere. But
Okay, you caught yourself. You caught yourself. You're like, I got to be consistent. I saw where you were going.
But if I was one of the other ones, I would just to what I think is the
People
top
see through your little game here. You hope you know that.
I'm sending folks out to the areas where we think we can get people to enroll, period. I think.
Yes, exactly. So here's the challenge with that. Approximately 40,000 high schools. You don't have a big enough budget to get to all 40,000 high schools. You just don't. Nobody does. The wealthiest schools in the country can't get to 40,000 high schools. Think how many people you would need to do that? Think about that. Everybody goes to one school. So, so there's nobody has enough staff to get to every school. They just simply don't. I met with an admission director on Saturday morning at the College Board Fair of a very wealthy school. It's smaller, but it's wealthy school. They have 8 people on their team, to hit the road travel. So there's no way you can do that. So that's a great option and people do it, but it's not comprehensive. And so think about some other things you could do. You could try to blast out invitations to everyone and say that we're going to be at the Four Seasons or name your hotel, whatever, right? The Marriott, and come out here for munchies and refreshments. And okay, that's good. But, if they don't know who you are, don't know much about you, chances are not everybody's going to come, right? I mean, you're talking about going out of your way. Like, at least when you go to the school, you come right into their presence. So that's good and that's effective. And you'll find that's a very common thing, by the way, that schools with more brand name do, or schools that have really cultivated a relationship with somebody and they're far along on the admissions pipeline will do. But the point is, it's not comprehensive. And other things you could do is you could try to really build up your program of getting people to come on campus, whether it's events and special events and junior visit days and special programming days and sporting events. But the point is, all of these things people do, but they're not going to comprehensively reach everybody. You can use social media, right? And have your social media and your engagement there. So the point is, there's lots of different things people do, but the only thing that really can give you access to almost every graduating senior is either the College Board Student Search Service, or the ACT also has basically almost, it's their own version, but it's almost identical from the standpoint of colleges buying lists of names to recruit students. And so that's what student search is. So that at least makes sense, right? Why they have it. Mm-hmm. So now let's talk a little bit more detail than we did back in episode 25. So there's 6 tests that students take. And when they take the test, they're asked at the start of the test to provide a lot of information about themselves. And they're asked to check a box if it's okay for colleges and universities to contact them. Take a guess what some of those 6, see how many, see if you can get, I'm going to be generous today. If you can get 3 of the 6, I'll give it a passing grade.
SAT.
Yep.
SAT subject test.
Yep. 2. Good.
ACT. And
what'd you say? ACT?
ACT. Oh, no, that's College Board. I mean, wait, that's not a College Board, is it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then
No, it's not. Well, it's not. ACT is not College Board, but remember, I didn't say 6 tests that College Board have. I said 6.
Oh, okay. I thought
6 tests that you can take.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So ACT has their own version.
And then
so
AP, IB.
AP. Okay. Well, you know what? You did really well on this. So there's lots of them, right? You've got subject tests, as you mentioned, SAT, AP, ACT. The one you didn't guess was PSAT, which is a huge one.
That one, yeah.
That's a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk more about that in a second. And then TOEFL, test of English as a foreign language for internationals.
Oh,
okay. So those are all times you can buy lists of names. Colleges buy lists of names. Okay. And the names right now, they're 47 cents per name to buy a name. It goes up like about $1 or $2 a year, and that's how much it costs. And people think, well, that doesn't sound like that much money. Well, wait till I go a little further. So let's talk a little bit more about how this works. So colleges conduct search campaigns, and these search campaigns are very, very, very sophisticated because they have all kinds of different metrics that they can use for a search campaign. You know what I'm talking about, Anika, when I say metrics?
Yeah, I would think that, if a child is scoring at a certain level, I want those kids.
Right. And actually, metrics wasn't a good word for me. I would say data was a much better word. So, for example, one of the things that you can do is you can buy lists of names based on test score, like you said.
All right.
Now, you're not allowed to do a search for an exact actual test score, but you can buy them in like bandwidths of 50. So, for example, if a school has an average test score of a 1200, they could say, we want to buy lists of names of everybody between an 1100 and a 1250.
Okay.
And a lot of times they'll go lower because one of the decisions you have to make is, are you trying to, one other criteria is, are you buying lists of names of seniors, juniors, sophomores, or freshmen? You can get all four of them because you have freshmen that take AP exams. Okay. And you have sophomores that take PSATs and take subject tests. And so names start coming into the system as in the freshman year. And so when colleges are buying lists of names of students who are younger, they tend to buy lower bandwidths that are lower than their averages because they know that those scores are going to go up over time, right?
Okay.
And if your range is too high, you probably are not going to be able to compete for that kid. That's just the way it is. So test scores is one thing you can look at. You can look at gender. You know what? I'm actually going to go through in some detail because I think people will be interested in this. Tell me if this is interesting or boring. I know I can get honesty out of you. All right. So obviously you can get the name of the student, and that's available for the PSAT. I'll just focus on PSAT, SAT, AP for now. All of them, you can get the name. You can get the birth date. All three tests offer that. This is a big one. Expected high school graduation date, right? So is it a senior? Is it a junior? Is it a sophomore? Is it a freshman? Geography. Okay. With geography, you can buy by international region, by country, by state, by county, and by zip code. You cannot target by individual school. They don't allow you to target by individual school. Just like they don't allow you to say, I want kids that had a 1310. Like you have to have 15-point bandwidths. And the ACT has similar type restrictions as well.
Okay.
Here's another one. You can target by college major, intended major. So one of the questions when you're filling out these tests at the start is, what major are you considering? Mm-hmm. Now, you can do that for the PSAT or the SAT, but not for AP. Here's another one. This is a big one. What is your current grade point average? Okay, so when you're doing a search, you can say, I want kids that have between a 3.3 and a 3.8, that have between an 1150 and a 1300. I'm looking for women. You can do it by ethnicity. Okay, you can say, I'm underrepresented in whatever, you're like Native Americans and Black women, I'm just making anything up, right? You can do your target that way. You can also look at other things for the SAT. The SAT has a more extensive list of questions that students have to fill out. And so it includes things like educational aspirations, financial aid, sports. I mean, there are a lot of things that are included, college living preferences, on campus, off campus, ROTC, are you interested? And then college characteristics is even in there. Like there's a question like, are you interested in schools with under 5,000? That kind of thing. College size, college setting, residential, rural, suburban, urban, student body, religious activities. All of these things are questions that are on there, and even high school course activities, that you're involved in. And so you can really, really micro-target. And take a guess, Anika, how many, this is one study I read that's pretty reputable. The average number of names the average college buys.
Jeez, I'm going to say hundreds of thousands. I'm just going to say
150,000 is the average.
Wow.
And so think about it. At 50 cents a pop, that's already 75 grand right there. Woo. Okay. And a lot of colleges are over, I attended a presentation from Oregon Tech just on Saturday, literally, geez, that was yesterday. I can't believe it was that fast yesterday. And little small Oregon Tech is going to buy 275,000 names next year. Yeah. And so, you do the math. And so you're starting to get a pretty hefty bill, right? But this is big business. So in addition to that, a lot of colleges hire a guru or a specialist who's like, I call him like a czar, but this person is like a master at coming up with, your search strategy, because you have to come up with the search strategy as well. You have a search campaign, right? But then you also have to have your search criteria for your search strategy as well. And so you either have to have an internal expert that's really, really, really good at this kind of thing, or you hire an outside guru that knows how to put the secret sauce together for you to target and get the kids that you want. Guess what the kind of starting going rate is, Anika, for one of these gurus to crunch all your numbers and come up with a strategy?
Easy 6 figures.
Well, 50 grand.
No, that's
50
it?
grand.
Really?
50 grand. Yep, 50 grand to hire someone to come up with your search strategy.
Goodness.
Look at you, big bucks over there.
Oh, please.
But think about it. But just think about it. Let's just say you're buying about 210,000 names.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's 100 grand. And now you're hiring an outside guru to put their secret sauce together and come up with a strategy for you. There's, let's say on the low side is 50. I'm sure the top people are over are 100, Noel Levitz is one of these firms that's really well known out there. And I imagine they're 6 figures, knowing them, their reputation.
Mm.
So that could be 50 to 100. Now, we haven't even talked about your designing and devising your marketing materials. You know how much money that is.
Oh, yeah. You
got your designers, that design them all those fancy glossy brochures and magazines that you're all receiving out there.
Yep.
And then you also have the print costs. So you got the design costs on all that. You got the print costs, and then you have the postage costs. So it's big business. Now, I attended a session actually at College Board on search. And I talked to their head guru. And people have been moving more toward email because of the cost, right? Because, when you buy lists of names, one of the other things that you have some choices. You can choose, am I only buying mailing lists or am I buying mailing and email? And then you can decide, am I going to do an email-only campaign or a mail and email campaign? A lot of colleges will save their mailing for their most desirable institutional priorities that are the hardest kids for them to get that they need. And if it's let's say, for example, you're a school in Pennsylvania, you got tons and tons and tons of high-achieving suburban girls from New Jersey, which most of the liberal arts schools in Pennsylvania have. So they may say, we get tons and tons of girls like this. Now, it's different if you're like a volleyball player or something like that they need. So we'll do an email campaign to you, okay? But let's say you are really, really struggling to get males in your nursing program, and you got a male and they indicate nursing and they're in your GPA test score bandwidth, then you may go after them without intentional, multiple, glossy mailings. And so this is kind of how the whole thing works. This is the way most schools target is their primary way of attracting applicants. And I'll tell you, it's incredible the sophistication of the marketing and how much beta testing and strategy is involved. But it can really, really be effective if, and they also use this to inform where they're going to visit and where they're going to do their fall travel. And so I know we talked about this before, like doing a deeper dive in a student search, but I know we didn't get into it at this level. So I want to just take a breath for a second, see if I said anything that you want to comment on or have questions on. Anika, what are you thinking?
Well, I got all kinds of mixed thoughts and emotions going on. So I'm thinking about schools and just recently opened up some really fancy mailing for Janaea. And I was like, there's no way in the world that girl would consider that school. Like, there's no way. Seriously. So it's like, why? Oh my God, the cost. That's what I was thinking about. I know how much that stuff. I have to deal with that,
Yeah, in your business, you know what you do with that for your day job.
Right. So what I'm thinking about the kid at the test, right? So the kid that they're taking that test, those kids aren't thinking about, okay, I'm thinking about my life plans. I'm here to take this test. I didn't studied and met with this tutor the past, I don't know how many months. Are they really answering those questions accurately? So do the kids understand what they're signing up for when they're checking off those boxes? Yes, 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 yes. And giving sincere answers. That's my first thought.
Okay.
So secondly, it's just, I don't know. I think let's just stop there because I'm seriously thinking about all the mail Janaea has gotten. And it's like, this girl would never, ever. So why is she getting this 3-fold, double, triple layered, glossy, whatever? It seems to me like crazy. So
you asked so many questions in there. Let's see if I can unpack it. Most people, I do believe, answer those questions honestly. Like there really wouldn't be a reason to lie.
Well, no. Let me back up. Let's stop there.
Okay.
I'm not saying that they lie.
Okay.
I'm saying when somebody asks me for a survey today and I'm sleepy, I'm just like, yeah, check. Okay, well, moving on. I'm just saying that's a reality of me and survey taking. So,
right, but think about what a lot of those questions are, right? So it's asking for your address. Okay, you could probably get that right. Your email, you'll probably get that right. Your gender, you'll probably get that right. Your race, you'll probably get that right. Intended major, you may skip that. And then if you skip that, and people know that majors change. Okay. Interested in athletics, maybe some of that, school size. I mean, most people will at least give something they're at least open to considering, even if they change their mind. Is that fair?
Yeah, I guess.
Open to considering. Okay. So, I mean, it's just a numbers game, Anika. Like, you can't get people into your school if you can't get in front of them. Like, I shared this story. Karis got 29 things from Vanderbilt. And many of those things were like glossy magazines. Every time the mail would come out, I'd be like, oh my goodness, they spent a fortune.
Mm-hmm.
And she never even visited Vanderbilt. Wasn't even on her list. But, you know, they targeted her.
So, but that's okay. So that's the next thought then. So if you're saying if you're really drilling down on these metrics to say, okay, you have a chance of being interested in us. I just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
You know what? Let me say something. I think this might help you. One other thing that I haven't talked about before, and that's the admissions funnel. So the admissions funnel, and you see different variations of it, but it's something along these lines. It's the funnel that, you know, you think of a funnel, right? You start out with a huge number and then you filter all the way down, right? You think of a funnel. Mm-hmm. So you start out with your prospects, and these are these names of lists of people that you buy. So that you have, you know, whatever, 500,000, you know, 250,000, whatever you start with. And I've talked to many colleges who wish they could buy even more names, but they get pushback internally from a bunch of people or, you know, other people inside their school. But they want to start with a big funnel so that you have access to people. Then you go to inquiry. That's different. A prospect is not an inquiry. An inquiry is going to be somebody who either filled out and requested information on your website. That's going to put you on a different list. Or what a lot of these mailings do, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but they will do a couple of things. Like there'll be like a perforated section where you can mail something back. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they're testing your interest. That like they're figuring out which of these people do we need to move into a different set of targeted mailings because they're showing interest to us.
Okay, so that's where I lost my train of thought.
Yes, I could tell you. I think you were going to. I think you were going there. Like, how do they know they're not just wasting money after money and just flushing money down the toilet? Right.
Also, when we talk about when we talk about the kids getting excited about, oh my God, they're paying so much attention to me, but maybe they are paying that much attention to you. That's where I'm conflicted.
Yeah, and just by the way, this is so important. We're taking this up next week as well. Our article next week deals with this. Several of you sent in an excellent article in the Wall Street Journal by Douglas Belkin on this topic. And we're going to approach it from a different perspective next week. So this is kind of a part 1 on search this week. And next week will be a part 2 on search. But another thing you'll see that's really common is QR codes with the URL. And it'll say, go to this. And then you type in your information. And then schools will say, oh, you're serious. And you've now moved on the funnel from a prospect to an inquiry. And then hopefully that you move from an inquiry to an applicant. And then hopefully you go from an applicant to an accepted applicant. And then hopefully you go from an accepted applicant to one who deposits and signs a contract. And then hopefully you matriculate and you enroll and you show up in the fall. So that's the whole admission funnel.
Okay, but what about the funnel of, oh, we want to recruit you to reject you? Let's not forget about that one.
So that's what we're talking about next week. Can I push that off to next week? Because that's next week's conversation.
I'm just saying.
It's a little cliffhanger for next week. That's the article. It is. Okay,
we better just stop then, Mark. We just stop.
So what I want to say is a couple of things quickly, and we can pick up next week. Not every college counselor agrees with me. Some people say bump search, don't sign up your name for that, just skip the whole thing. I don't agree with that. I encourage people to sign up and to give your name. Now, here's what I recommend. Put a specific email in that you're only going to use for search, because otherwise your email will be flooded. They will take over. They will dominate your email with emails. So, for example, you could do JanaeMadden2020@gmail.com. Like, just make one up that's just for search. So you have your one place where all your search stuff is. Then I recommend for schools that you're interested in, fill out that QR code with that URL. Take that reply, perforate it, fill it out and stick it in the mail. Because what will happen is you will start to get invited to special events. You'll go onto like a priority mailing list of someone who showed interest in them, and you'll get invited to some special events and you'll see different things. And so now, obviously, I'm not saying to do that for schools you have no interest in, but only for schools that you're interested in.
Okay.
But let's next week talk about the whole recruiting to reject and whether this is an ethical or unethical practice and all that. Let's get into that a little bit more, because that's also what that article discusses. But hopefully we tantalize people enough to make them want to come back.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
I really like how you started with the Ivy League being a football conference, because as you know, so many people don't know that. So many people will talk to us about a school and they'll say, isn't it Ivy League? And Ivy League has almost become a euphemism for high standards sort of in the public's mind. And another consequence I feel is how many great schools get overlooked. Schools that may even be better than those schools as far as being a match for a kid.
Yeah. Well, that is very, very well said. And it's so true. And let me share a personal observation. I mean, when I first got into this work, I actually did believe that there were kind of the haves and the have-not. I'm not sure I ever believed that there were only, 15 or 20 great colleges and the rest weren't so hot. But I certainly believed that there was a large gap between the well-known schools and the rest. And it wasn't until I started traveling and talking to teachers and talking to students and seeing the growth and development, seeing the new things that were happening on so many campuses in terms of curricular development, in terms of freshman year experiences, in terms of orientation programs, and on and on and on. Only after those visits did I really appreciate the richness of the landscape of higher education. And I'm just talking about in this country. Clearly, there are wonderful choices elsewhere. But I really, and every year when I visit, I am impressed with the numbers of schools that are just doing remarkable things.
No, well said. And so am I. I mean, I just got back. I've been traveling a lot this summer doing visits. And it's the first time I ever visited the Minnesota schools in the greater Minneapolis area. Mm-hmm. And boy, there's some real gems. But every state's got schools like that.
It's true. It is really true. And that's why I'm so glad that you're exposing people to this topic and speaking as clearly as you are about the vast numbers of great schools. And you're right. If you look at, Minneapolis, when you look at Carleton and McAllister and the University of Minnesota and even Bethel and Augsburg, I mean,
and St. Olaf.
And St. Olaf, yeah, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole lot of others, but there's just tremendous opportunities. And you also, the question before last, made a very critical point, and that is the question isn't, is it a good school? The question is it a good school for me or for Buffy or for James? And once you begin, and once we can convince a student to really focus on that environment that is going to bring out the best in that student, that is so liberating in the process. And it causes students, instead of tears, to really be happy, because instead of being really down because they may not get into, let's say, 50 colleges, if we can get them excited that they have, 2,950 schools to choose from.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And I love your passion. What would you say, Steven, to the person, the parent, the student, the college counselor is listening out there and says, well, if I visit any college, of course they're going to tell me they're great. That's their job to do that. So that's what the rankings are for. Don't the rankings serve as an effective way of sussing out who's good and who's not good? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the rankings don't suss out the quality. The rankings don't allow a particular student to know what schools have the qualities that are success-oriented for that student. Remember that U.S. News was a failing news magazine. I mean, they still have the name U.S. News, even though they haven't been a news magazine for decades. They have decided that they would rank colleges, and it's been a bonanza for them. And I like to talk to families about how U.S. News makes and what the factors are that are included in the U.S. News rating. For example, 20 or 25% of the rating is a popularity contest, they ask college presidents and directors of admission to evaluate colleges and to tell what the best colleges are. They also use only input variables, or mainly input variables. In other words, faculty salaries and how selective the school is. They don't use output variables. They don't use, is anybody happy at that college? Is anybody learning anything at that college? What sort of job success do people have? And so I feel like, yes, if you want to look at U.S. News, it's there, but at least understand what they're ranking. And the other thing, Mark, I want to say is that we kind of, as a society, have decided what to rank and what not to rank. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we do not rank churches because apparently, I don't know, but my guess is that somebody has thought, how could you possibly rank, one denomination against another? And how could you possibly rank, suburban churches with urban? And how could you rank pastors and priests and rabbis? My feeling is that higher education is just as complex, and yet we are ranking them. And so therefore, we're putting a specialized vocationally oriented school in the same pot as a school that is a strict liberal arts and sciences school. We put in the same pot schools that have very, very different missions and goals and purposes. So it seems to me that one ranking system, such as U.S. News, is of limited value for all of those reasons, and also because when Jessica or James is looking for a college, for some students, it's not how many faculty members have PhDs. It may be who are great teachers, who's going to connect with the kind of learner that I am. And that's the problem with rankings. And that's why I think that as advisors, we need to try to be as clear as we can that, as great of schools as Yale or Princeton or Stanford, I mean, these are wonderful places and great places for some students. On the other hand, there are many others that even if they could get into those schools, those schools would not necessarily be a good match.
I'm really glad you brought that up because, there's a lot of talk about undermatching, but there can be overmatching. And I know I've seen a lot of this, particularly kids that want to go into the medical field, for example. If you're really a grinder and you've worked really hard to get your grades, and you try to go pre-med at one of these places where the kids are just at maybe a higher level in developing their skills than where you're at, boy, you can be in for some undue stress and a rocky ride. I'm sure you've experienced that as well in your practice.
So true. I mean, it's really true. And there's evidence that parents and students can look at for the point that you're making. For example, you can go online and look at the undergraduate institutions of students admitted to Harvard Law School. And you will see as many variations as there are in schools. You'll see a lot of large state schools. You're going to see smaller schools like we were talking about in Minneapolis. You will just see a whole gamut. And the reason that you see a whole gamut is the point that you're making, because, go to a school where you can shine, where you can really do well, where you can get great teaching, where you can get great recommendations. And whether it's law school, medical school, a job, working on a teaching degree, or what have you, success counts.
Well said.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 95 is Initial View. Now, Initial View was founded in 2009. The website is initialview.com. And what Initial View does is it reduces the time it takes to do mock interviews. They specialize in the selfie interview. It's a tool to help counselors prepare students by giving them video feedback and saving the counselor a lot of time. Counselors can also use Initial View for personal interview feedback. The way that this works is the counselor sends questions that he or she creates to the student. The student records his or her answer by video. The student sends his or her answers back to the counselor, and the counselor watches the video and sends feedback directly to the student via computer from the comfort of his home or office at location of his or her choosing. And what makes this so practical is the counselor is able to give feedback on his or her schedule. One of the premises of Initial View, and I would concur with this, is that being able to have a slam dunk interview is often the difference between getting a job and getting passed over for the job. Initial View believes that we are a test score obsessed country, which I would concur with. But it's your ability to interview that will often carry more weight than your test scores when it comes to getting that job. But we pay so little attention to interview skills. Check out initialview.com. Steven, I know you've got a number of myths on your website and in your books that you've talked about, and we've kind of focused on one here today. Is there another one that's kind of on your heart or on your mind a lot lately that you've written about or you've been thinking about a lot that you want to say a word or two on?
Well, yes, I would say, and it's sort of included in the discussion that we've already had, but the notion that colleges are either good or bad, that they're, it's one way or another. The notion that future employers or graduate schools give an edge to graduates of prestigious universities. And again, some of these myths, there's an ounce of truth, but success, as we've said, really counts. The myth that colleges always pick the best students. As a former admissions person, and I know you've worked in admission offices, you know how hard admissions offices work and admissions officers work toward really finding the best students. But look, these days, how much time, if Stanford's getting 40,000 applications, how much time are they going to be able to take with every candidate? And so, you have to share with students that colleges, they do their best, but they may not choose the diamonds in the rough. They may not choose the very best person. The other myth, or actually a series of myths, Mark, that are really important these days in college planning are the myths in and around cost. The notion that, you need to be made of money in order to go to college, or the notion that schools that cost more are of higher quality, or the myth that since cost is important, I won't be able to go to any school other than the local state school. Those again are straitjacket items that cause people not to do a thorough search, not to look for schools that are just as good that cost less, not looking at schools that are going to be more likely to meet your financial need, not looking at schools that may be able to provide merit scholarships regardless of family income. So I think that a lot of the reason that college planning has become larger than life are issues related to cost and families feeling like that means they don't have any choices.
Well said. You know what? And I really liked how you talked about how schools may not always necessarily pick the best student. And I think one thing that I feel I can't emphasize enough, I know I experienced this in my admissions career over and over and over again. And every time I do case studies, I see it. Can you talk a little bit about how the bias of individual admission officers and how that impacts decisions, and how literally if another person in the same admission office might have been the one who read your file, it oftentimes would render a different decision?
Yeah. I don't know that I can say it any better than you've just said it, but these are human beings that are reading folders in admission offices. These are human beings that have life experiences. Their life experience might indicate that if you've been really involved in debate, that's a trait, that's a group of traits that's extremely important. And if I see that on an applicant, I may feel that gives that student an edge. Another admission officer might have a similar feeling toward artists or musicians or jugglers or whatever. So each person, and again, they do their best to be fair and reasonable, but there's an awful lot of luck. If I'm a musician, and that's a major part of my experience in high school, and I'm read by someone who has a special interest in that, I may be given a little bit of an edge. Remember also that college admission these days at the selective colleges is about social engineering. In other words, it's all of the things that we've already talked about in terms of athletics and legacies and development, but it also includes the number from different parts of the country and the numbers of people in the sciences versus the non-sciences. And every year, admission offices are making these social engineering decisions. You know, we just built a new performing arts center, and we need another dozen students who are going to major in those areas. So there's just a lot of factors that affect admission decisions that have nothing to do with students. And I like to say to my students, I like to say something like, I have gotten to know you, Jenny, really well over these months. If I were an admissions director, I would take you to this school. But the truth is that the admissions officers are not going to know you as well as your counselor. And so we need to plan accordingly. We need to have good, hopefully you'll get into your first choice and your dream colleges, but we recognize that the system is the way it is, and that sometimes even the very best students are not given that acceptance letter.
Okay, friends, as promised, I'm doing an overview of the College Board conference I attended in Washington, D.C. on the 6th, 7th, and 8th of November. And just a little bit about the College Board, because people don't know the College Board is. The College Board is a juggernaut. It is a behemoth. It is a $1 billion a year budget organization, which is not a joke. Not $1 million, not 10 million, not 50, not 100, $1 billion budget, 1.07 were their revenues in 2017. It is 119 years old. It is been in New York ever since it was founded, and was founded basically on Columbia's campus, and it still continues to be in New York. And it's a not-for-profit organization, and it administers standardized tests and K-12 and post-secondary education curriculum. So when you think of College Board, you're thinking of things like the SAT, SAT subject test, PSAT, advanced placement, and then CLEP, AccuPlacer, Springboard, and some of those other programs that we haven't talked that much about them, but at some point we'll talk about all three of those things on this podcast, both CLEP, AccuPlacer, Springboard, three other programs. So it's controversial because, it's a nonprofit, but some people feel as if there are some things it does that are questionable when it comes to how they operate. Founding colleges, just to get a sense of that: Columbia, Colgate, University of Pennsylvania, NYU, Barnard, Union, Rutgers, Vassar, Bryn Mawr, Women's College of Baltimore, which is now Goucher College, Princeton, and Cornell, and then a few high schools also were involved in the founding. And some of the things that are a little bit on the more controversial side of the College Board include things like their fees, exam fees, $94 for an AP exam, $50 for an SAT, but some people feel they could be a lot more generous when it comes to waivers. And there have also been some criticisms along the way about how certain things have been handled. That's probably for another day, getting into some of the controversies. One of them I will mention, though, is selling of student data, by the way, Anika. selling names at, for almost 50 cents a pop. Not everybody necessarily knows their name's being sold when they check that box. They know that colleges are buying them, but they don't necessarily know how much of a moneymaker that is for the College Board. So those are some of the controversies. But they put on a really good conference where they bring together, it was 2,100 of us there, Anika. I was not expecting it to be that many. It was a lot. And it's a really good place for networking, first of all. Like the entire Big Ten had all their director of admissions. I think the whole UC system had all their directors there. Large numbers of directors of admissions come there for the annual conference to get caught up on new trends and new things that are going on. So I was struggling because I attended some outstanding sessions and I was trying to think, how can I jam all this in? And so I thought, do I do a little blurb on each one? But you know me, I can't do little blurbs because it's not in my DNA. So I will just mention a couple of the sessions that I thought were great, and then I'm going to go in a little bit more detail on one of them. I attended an outstanding session on the Higher Ed Authorization Act and what's going on with that in Congress and where is it and what are the proposals, what are the Democrats saying, what are the Republicans saying, what looks like it's going to pass. That was really, really, really good. I attended an excellent session on student search that we just talked about. What's new in student search? That was good. There was a really good, Anika, remember when we discussed this whole thing about APs, like how UNC has found that 5 AP tests is, if you take 5, that's good, and then you don't need more than that?
Right. Yeah.
So there was a panel of selective colleges that were talking about that, like how much AP is too much. Mm-hmm. That was a fascinating presentation that was really good. Attended a really good session on the CLEP exam, which I'll be talking about more in another podcast. That was really good. And I attended an excellent session. This one was really good on the University of California and their admission system and how they implement holistic admission. And one thing I'm really mad at myself for, Anika, we've talked about the coalition, we've talked about the Common App. We should have done a real deep dive on the UC app. And, it's only open from November 1st to November 30th. So I kind of feel like we missed that window.
Oh, wow.
But next year, for sure, we got to go deep in the UC app because there's so many people that do that UC app, like way more than the coalition. And so next year, we'll go deep into that. But I attended an outstanding session on changes within the UCs. And I do have to make a big, not announcement, Anika, but I have to share what the buzz was. There was an elephant in the room throughout the whole conference. Mm-hmm. So we haven't talked about this on this podcast, but there's a lawsuit against the University of California system saying that the SAT is discriminatory against underrepresented people of color and that it is not as useful a metric as the import that it carries in the process. In other words, way too much emphasis has been put on that test, given the lack of value that it delivers. He's been very critical of the SAT. He talks about how he went into, I think he said a second grade classroom and he saw kids practicing for the SAT then, they said, this is ridiculous. Is this what education has come to? So I say all this to say that the thinking, and I talked to many people about this, is that the University of California is going to go test optional in 2020. And that would be like a bombshell. Like, you got to understand how big that is. That's all those schools, like huge schools like UCLA and Berkeley and Irvine and Davis and Santa Barbara and San Diego and many Riverside. There's so many in there. And that would be so I'm not saying it. I'm just telling you that most of the experts that were at the conference are predicting that that's going to happen. So stay tuned for that. Now, there's one session I haven't commented on that I want to talk about today that I've picked to highlight a little is the one on summer melt. That was really good. Remember, Anika, give our listeners just a quick overview of what summer melt is.
Well, from what I remember, and I actually connected it to a personal friend who dealt with that, and I didn't realize that's what it was until after we recorded the episode. And that's where students are accepted into the schools, but over the summer, they're required to meet these deadlines and submit certain forms and all these things. And they just don't check their stuff. Like they're not keeping up. They just assume, oh, I've been accepted and I'm just going to show up at the school and it's going to be fine. So they melt away because they don't do the necessary administrative pieces that they need to do throughout the summer, leading up to, moving in.
Exactly. So summer melt means you melt away like a popsicle melts away in the summer. Like you don't show up. You're invisible. You're gone. You signed a contract. You deposited. But in the fall, you are a no-show. And so it was a group of administrators in Maine, not administrators, educational administrators in Maine that are working on this issue because it's become such a big problem there. 1 out of every 5 students melts away. And so they got a grant to study it. And so they shared the research and it was really good. And they started the presentation by saying, this can't happen in Maine. We are an old population. Our average age is 44.9. We have a shortage of skilled workers. And we just can't have 1 in 5 people not showing up after they go all the way through the matriculation, enrollment, deposit, and they still don't show up. And so they started out by saying, who do we have here? How many of you are college counselors? Put up your hand. How many are financial aid people? Put up your hand. How many people are college admissions people? And they're like, oh my goodness. 85% of the people in the room were college admissions people. They were all there because this is such a big problem on their campus. And so then the first thing they did is they surveyed all the college admissions people, like, why is summer melt happening on your campus? So one person said, people have a change in family status. Maybe that means married or whatever, or, it could be lots of different things, right? Someone else said financial issues. Someone else said they get off their wait list from like a school that was their top choice anyway. So then they go there. Someone else said transportation issues. Someone else said they feel a lack of connection to the college over the summer. Poor handoff from the high school to the college. Another admission person said mental health challenges. Someone else said they get cold feet about distance from home. Someone else said they don't know who to go for questions about college. The high school counselor's not working over the summer. And so then those are all great answers. And then the expert said, well, let me tell you some more. And then they shared the research. This is really prevalent with first generation low income and community college attendees because they just don't come from a background where they have that parent modeling. And they said, like, if you come from a family where your parents went to college, when you encounter a problem, you're like, I just worked through it. But if you haven't done that, like, you think, well, maybe college isn't for me. And so some of the additional things that they emphasize on the panel included check your email, check your email, check your email. Kids are into texts. We're sending emails. Log into your college portal. Like, we have all this stuff in there, but if you don't log in, you don't see what to do. And then they said, you got to come to orientation. Whatever you do, get to orientation because all the information is lined up there. They talked about signing the FERPA statement. They talked about knowing where the bursar office is and knowing the key people and the key departments and what they do. They talked about FAFSA filing and FAFSA verification. They say 25% of kids are lost because they get FAFSA verified and they don't know what to do. We've talked about that before. Then they talked about understanding your financial aid offer, your award letter. They said immunization paperwork, that can be required. And if you've moved around a lot, you may be going back to a doctor 4 moves ago to get it. And they talked about housing deposits and having to put your housing deposit in before you've gotten any money from the school, having reliable transportation for commuters, and understanding payment plans and when bills are due. And so those are just some of the things that they talked about. And I thought it was a great session. What do you think, Anika?
I thought it was an excellent session. I wasn't even there.
Well, I tape record everything. So if you ever get zealous, I'll send you tape.
It's so heartbreaking. And those kids go through all of that and they just melt. And it's not acceptable. So thank you for being there, Mark. That is, yeah. Mm.
One idea that they said that some of the people found really helpful, because, a lot of the college admissions people were talking about, these are people even that come to our orientation sometimes and everything, and we think they're coming and they don't show up. So the best thing they found is to create a text, there's like Signal Vine. I don't know if you've heard of Signal Vine, but it's like a texting service that you can use. Mm-hmm. And the people that have had the most success, like there was another group there that had done a whole project on this, and they moved the meltdown from 20% to 4% by using like a lot of text messages, addressing problems when they come up, having an advisor over the summer that serves as a summer advisor, connecting people to the college people early so they know who to go to on the college to get their questions answered. And then this is a little thing, but they found that if they got them to the college, got a t-shirt or a shirt with the school on, especially for first gen kids, they started to see themselves as, I'm now a college student at this place and this is my new identity. Mm. And that made me think every college out there needs to send kids a shirt. I'm serious.
Yeah.
All the money you spend.
Hats, whatever you got. Umbrellas.
Oh, you know what I didn't share, Anika, when I was talking about search?
What's that?
There's a new study that's come out that said that the average school spends close to $2,500 a year to recruit one kid.
Wow.
That's how much they're spending, to recruit one student. So I'm thinking, if you could spend $2,500 to recruit a kid, can you spring $10 for the shirt?
Please. But let me ask you, was there any, I know they talked about having an advisor over the summer, but was there any empowerment of the high school counselor, or are they just like letting that go? Like, okay, they're done. Like, we can't.
Well, they were kind of imploring schools to pay high school counselors more money so that they could work over the summer. Like make them 12-month employees, not 9-month employees.
Right.
Pay them extra money, because that was where a lot of the problem was the drop off. I can't go to my high school counselor. They're not available. I don't know where to go on the college.
Right.
And especially true for these are, the one thing I realized, Anika, both my parents, of course, graduated. I never for 1 second ever doubted that I would ever go to college. I never for 1 second ever doubted I would graduate. But it's a very different mindset for a first gen student that doesn't have that parent with that sophistication or that modeling and that mentoring in the home.
Right.
And I'm just empathetic. I felt for the kids, and I also feel for the schools as someone who did admissions. Like, I feel bad. You worked really hard traveling and recruiting, reading season, everything, yield season, everything to get people there. Then you get them to orientation, then you get their deposit, and you think you've got them, and then you're losing 1 out of 5.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's all good. Oh, it's not all good. It's actually all bad.
No, it's stick that right out of my mouth. Like, wait a minute, Mark.
I need some sleep.
Me too. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.